Welcome to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where you can learn and be inspired by real-world examples of how technology is transforming businesses and reshaping industries in a language everyone can understand. Here is your host, Neil C. Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast. Now, today is one of those days where my past comes back to haunt me. Because before running this Daily Tech Podcast and having a career writing about technology, I was an IT guy. And once upon a time, I was an app guy. And I was the first port of call for any problems with finance applications and upgrades around things like Sage in a corporate environment. Now, fast forward 6 years, and I'm now going to be talking to Sage about their new product that is designed by accountants for accountants, and it's called Sage for Accountants, predictably. And it's a practice management suite that is providing client onboarding, connected client management and productivity tools, as well as data collection and smart reporting, bookkeeping, payroll and compliance. All the big boxes are ticked there. So today I've invited Chris Downing, Director of Product Marketing at Sage, and Gertie Bester, Director of Product Marketing at Sage. So I've invited them both onto the podcast because they've also got a fascinating backstory. I mean, they're both former chartered accountants, and they're going to be discussing today why they've decided to invest so much time and resources into this new product and how they involve their customers in that process around the development of it and how it can actually help accountants meet practical demands in this increasingly challenging marketplace. So buckle up and hold on tight as I beam your ears all the way to the UK, so we can speak with Chris and Gertie about all this and much more. So a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Thanks, Neil, and it's great to be on the show. Gertie Bester, I'm one of the product management directors at Sage, and I'm super excited to be talking you through what we've done with Sage for Accountants today.
Yeah, hi Neil, it's Chris Downing here, one of the product director, marketing directors for Sage, basically focused on the accountancy division. And I've been at Sage for 3.5 years, but prior to that, I was an accountant by trade for nearly 20 years. So I'm bringing the conscience of the customer to the big green Sage machine.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you both on the podcast today. There's a lot I'm excited to be talking with you about. But before we do, I want to take you way back before the days of Sage and ask you to share your origin story, where your passion for finance and technology came from, how those worlds collided, and ultimately put you on the path you're on today. And Gertie, I'll let you go first.
Brilliant. Thanks, Neil. I think my origin story goes right back to probably the age of 3 or 4. And it's not as exciting, but probably more a villain origin story. I broke my mother's digital clock. And out of sheer fear of being in trouble, I attempted to put it back together. That wasn't successful, but I did learn quite a lot about technology and how it works. And that really just spawned a love of technology right through my university days and then into my career. I think my love for numbers is also something that I stumbled into. I studied a double major in accounting and communications, and it was the thing to do back then is to go into accounting. But working in the accounting industry made me realize that there's a way to mesh these two worlds, my interest of technology and my theoretical studies in accounting. And the natural path was joining Sage in the accounting technology space.
What a great story, and I love how those two worlds collided for you. And Chris, do you have an origin story? Can you remember what put you on this path?
Well, I was just thinking back, and because it's Christmas, let's think about Christmas. And I remember being the age of 6 and getting my first ever computer, and I was amazed. It was an Amstrad CPC 464. You loaded your games or your little Word program with a tape in those days, and it had the power of 64 kilobytes of RAM. Wow. But that was the amazing thing. It was like the first all color PC available, home PCs. You suddenly got the interest in terms of, wow, you could do something really interesting. And that basically gave you that sort of natural interest in terms of computing. But actually, fast forward by 15 years. And it's all a case of, well, I was always passionate about numbers. So my first ever job was being an accountant, and actually Sage is my second ever job, actually. So I joined this accounting firm and actually had work experience with them back in college. And within that firm, I worked my way through the ranks, became partner. But through my career there, I always recognized the benefits and also the value which small businesses gained from better understanding their numbers. And it really is a case of bringing the data alive. Pretty pictures, i.e. that story of a picture tells 1,000 words is very, very true. And therefore, how can we use technology to actually surface information in a format which actually makes a more intriguing conversation? So when Sage basically sort of offered me the role within looking at how we've actually focused and provide more interest and insight to accountants, it was that natural progression and interest in terms of not just the numbers, but also the tech side as well.
I love that. And it's easy to forget just how far we've come. As children, before the days of mobiles and the internet even, and computers first arrived on the scene with, like you say, 64 kilobytes of RAM on that Amstrad. I know the Commodore 64 was obviously 64, and the BBC, which I had half that at 32 kilobytes. But it still felt like something quite special, and a new world was opening up, didn't it?
And also goes to demonstrate what you can do with minimal tools and effort, isn't it? Because it was only 64 kilobytes. It's just hard to even imagine what that really is. But one could actually have quite a fun time with a motor racing game. You could do some very, very simple spreadsheets, all of which saved time and basically opened up a different conversation or view in terms of what is possible.
Yeah, it really did. I used to remember I think it was adventure games. It was just a DOS screen. You used to select look or enter bar and things like that. But you conjured everything up in your imagination. It was brilliant. But of course, that path.
Oregon Trail.
Yeah, Oregon Trail. Exactly that. Enter tavern.
All of us would have died of dysentery.
And of course, that path led you both to Sage, which has recently released Sage for Accountants. So can you tell me a little bit more about this release and the problems that you set out to solve and who it's aimed at?
Sage for Accountants is really more of not just a product. It's an entire proposition for accountants. And when we started out on this journey a couple of months ago, one of the key things that we did was talk to our clients, and there were things that stood out, like make it easier for me to do my day job, make it easier for me to work with Sage. And we took all of the feedback to heart. And when we did our design, customer feedback was at the core of it. So Sage for Accountants is the single pane of glass, really, that accountants will use to access all of their customers, see all of the relevant information about what tasks needs to be done, what are the deadlines coming up, and for them to manage their subscriptions with Sage. Layered on top of that is a redesigned or reinvigorated learning and education program. And the cherry on top of the cake there is a reward system where we want to encourage our accountants to not just buy more, but learn more, experience more, collaborate more, and work closer with their client and us, going back to the customer problem that we are solving.
And when I first heard about the announcement, the first thing that stood out to me was for Sage, it appears that you guys are on a mission to unify and digitalise accountants' practices with this suite of easy-to-use tools. And I think removing friction is so important in just about every area of our lives and work right now. But just to try and almost set the scene and talk about and highlight some of the problems out there, what have been the biggest challenges for your customers and indeed Sage in adapting to this always-on digital world where it's not just about remote working, but hybrid working and so much more? So what are the biggest challenges you've seen?
Bang on, Neil. And I think, Chris, you're best suited for this one as you're quite passionate about the pains that accountants experience.
Yeah, thank you, Gertie. Accountants have always been that trusted individual for the small business owner, but we have not seen so much more change in and increase in demand for the accountant and the bookkeeper than we have in the last 2 years. And also, it's the changing role of the accountant, because accountants have traditionally been, let's say, that end-of-year compliance engine, get the records in, produce a set of accounts, get the tax return out, and advise a client of what taxes they need to pay. But actually, the experience and the requirements for the small business owner has changed so much more in the fact that the accountant isn't just, let's say, the provider of, let's say, the compliance, but also the provider of, in terms of insight, in terms of how that small business can perform better, whether that's identifying opportunities, whether it's managing cash flow, whether it's actually building or creating a sense of resilience in that small business, especially with the challenges of trading generally over the last 2 years. But as we sort of look into the future, legislation is constantly changing. And therefore, that is where the accountant is the expert day in, day out. But also the small business owner is actually looking towards the accountant in terms of actually, how can I perform better? What tools do I need to run my business? How do I actually get the best out of my employees? And really, this is the whole point, is that the second language of the accountant is money and it is finance. And therefore, the accountant is able to interpret this, but also with the use of great technology to actually provide a really great experience, which is value for money to the small business owner, because the small business owner wants more, but not necessarily wants to pay for it. But also it means that the accountant can actually deliver more as well, because what we have seen in terms of some of the trends is that the value of compliance may be reducing over time. And therefore, one of the things the accountant needs to think about is, how do I serve his small clients with less effort per client? And again, it still comes down to that overarching theme of saving time, creating capacity, and mitigating the rekeying information, whether that's in your practice management solution, your year-end accounts business solution, or even just doing the bookkeeping. And this is what Sage's mission is to deliver, is effectively all those tools in a single experience, but also an agnostic experience. Because the other thing we recognize is that small business owners are using a whole plethora of different digital tools, all of which Sage enables that business owner to work with the accountant within their Sage environment.
And it's interesting, right? I think it was in the 14th or 15th century when Gutenberg invented the printing press that the world as we know it changed. It brought people together. Knowledge was all of a sudden available to the masses, and fundamentally everything shifted. To a very large extent, COVID is our printing press moment. Prior to the pandemic, we saw people taking up digital tools and there was a huge uptake, but those were more your North Stars, the early adopters, whereas COVID is driving a different way of working. I think you said it quite well when you said Sage is all about digitalization. And yeah, that's exactly what we are passionate about. If we were to just digitize the processes, take the paper format or the old way of doing things and make it digital, we wouldn't be adding a whole lot of value. But by digitalizing it, taking those processes, making them digital, making them more efficient, making them live in a world that's different, that's where we really see we're adding value and how we are contributing to this, to say, the Gutenberg moment of a changing world.
I completely agree with you. And we began the conversation talking about computers in those days of 32 kilobytes or 64 kilobytes of RAM. And I think if we fast forward a few years and then in the world of business, we all kind of accepted clunky software. They all had their funny little quirks, but hey, that's just the way it was. And we all kind of accepted that. But I think that is completely changed now, that attitude. And while digitalisation has accelerated, 60% of accountancy firms say they don't feel confident using their software. And one of the big reasons is having digital products isn't enough, because accountants need digitised tools and connected frictionless experiences. And again, like I said, at the moment, we expect these frictionless experiences everywhere now. But reading about stuff like this, did that surprise you?
Not really. If I take myself just as a litmus test, I was an adopter of the iPhone back when there was no app store even.
Yeah.
And back then you think, oh, this is great, but can't really do a whole lot with it because it's not changed anything for me. Flash forward a year or two when the iPhone sort of evolved into having the App Store, having my choice of apps, having my way of doing things, but equally changing the way that I communicate, adding WhatsApp, adding iMessage onto it, and fundamentally shifting how things are done, that's when it was really the moment to pivot. And I think accountants are struggling with the same thing in that digital tools are out there, but all it does is it takes what they're doing today manually or on paper or on old clunky software, and it puts it in the quote unquote cloud. But that's not good enough because you haven't actually made them more efficient. You haven't increased their capacity. You haven't made them more profitable. None of that has happened. So I can absolutely understand why accountants are saying they aren't keen to take this. And those are the barriers that we are looking to knock down, to take those processes, make them digital and digitalize them really.
And looking at Sage's recent research, I think that revealed that 99% of accountants use some form of digital accounting. So there's no big surprises there. But I've got to ask, do you think initially the industry was slow to react to these kind of changes?
Certainly not. And I can talk from that as being the accountant by trade on this call.
Yeah.
And the challenge isn't the fact that the accountants aren't using digital tools at the pace they'd expect to, or the industry expects to. The pace of digitization or being more efficient is actually dictated by their clients. It's a fact that the tools are relatively available. They're very accessible. They're easy to set up. They're relatively straightforward to implement as long as you actually put the right time in place to actually plan ahead and think about the new process need to be applied. But it's all very well having a great cloud tool or a collaborative system or systems or solutions to actually grab data from your clients, if your clients aren't willing to be on that same journey. And that has probably been, let's say, one of the key barriers to, it's really the capitalization of what's available and really penetrating in terms of what an accountant can actually do with the tools available. And I think what we have seen over the last 2 years is that acceleration and appreciation of small business owners of what tech can really do for their business. Because you think of all the stories in terms of businesses who have really struggled, but those businesses who have been on top of their numbers, being able to collaborate in real time with their accountants, yes, it was still tough, but at least a plan could be created. There was awareness in terms of what cash could be used, making furlough claims, or actually thinking about the future, what could they actually do and how could they plan for it? And therefore, it's a case of how people have started to use technology differently, whether that's Zoom or that's Teams. Mobile banking is certainly more prevalent. It is the general trend. I think that's been the barrier. The barrier has actually been the clients, not necessarily the approach by accountants.
And we will have people listening all over the world, and they will consist of teachers, lawyers, chefs, accountants, etc. And the thing is, of course, that all these professions, they're not technologists, and they're finding themselves in a digital world surrounded by jargon. And I've been in enough IT meetings with multiple stakeholders from around the business. As soon as the tech guy opens their mouth, everyone starts thinking about what they want to eat for tea and what they're going to be doing at the weekend. So one of the reasons I started this podcast was to try and put all that in a language that everyone can understand and help people understand how technology can solve their problems that they're going through right now. So how are you using technology to help accountants, help their clients, and help them navigate in this digital world?
So one of the key things which is happening over the next 12 to 18 months, especially in the UK, is the requirement for small businesses to adopt technology to meet the new demands of HMRC and quarterly reporting. And it's not just about digital bookkeeping. It's how do people who have maybe used manual records for the last 15, 20 years suddenly adopt technology. And this is where the experience has got to be key. That initial 1 day, 2 day, 10-day experience, and really making sure that people can adopt a new tool as intuitively as possible. And we've mentioned Apple a couple of times so far. And I think this is the whole point is you can give a 5-year-old an iPhone and they will intuitively start to think about how they actually use some of the apps. How do they actually, let's say, take a picture? And it's making sure that experience is intuitive. And really, that's one of the approaches that Sage has done, is actually trying to make it as easy as possible to actually make available the power of, let's say, bookkeeping tools, but make it in a way which actually accountants can actually pass these tools over to their clients, and the clients can do pretty much most of the bookkeeping themselves. But where they need help or assistance, the accountant can actually help and support. But more importantly, they're the right nudges and the triggers within this app to ensure that actually the client feels confident about what they're doing as well.
And even something as basic as making sure that whatever terminology we use is something that people can relate to and not technical accounting terminology. If we throw debits and credits at the plumber, chances are he's not going to take up that solution. And we want to make it as easy as possible for them to understand it. So we're putting things in ways that people can understand, even on a content basis.
And just to help listeners understand how Sage for Accountants would maybe work in their world and how one-click access to this suite of tools could actually help them, do you have a use case or a client story that would just bring to life everything that we're talking about today?
I think one of the key use cases is the fact that what we have seen is that entrepreneurial spirit has never been stronger. And we've seen thousands of new accountancy firms being born over the last 12 months. Now, what these accountancy firms want to do, they want to set up quickly, work from home, and collaborate instantaneously with their clients. So therefore, what Sage for Accountants enables these firms to do is spin up Sage for Accountants effectively, create their first client, but also collaborate with their client, which means that their client is able to start working straight away with a bookkeeping solution, do online payroll if they want to, use auto entry to sort of capture their purchase invoice and get them digitalized and processed. All of these tools enable the accountant and the small business owner to collaborate straight away. And really, this is the key thing, is actually not only helping and supporting startup businesses, but also enabling existing accountants who want to do more and save time. And this is why, again, under the umbrella for Sage for Accountants, our acquisition of Go Proposal. And for those of you who aren't aware, it's an amazing tool which helps accountants ensure that they are servicing their clients appropriately based upon their needs, pricing appropriately, and more importantly, dealing with maybe some of that admin and back office work called letters of engagement, all of which, again, is about saving time, but more importantly, providing a really great experience for the end customer client themselves.
And over the last 2 years, we've seen so many transformational changes across every industry. It began with almost working from home experiment all across the world, and that kind of evolved into hybrid working. As we come out the other side of this, we've got this expectation now that we should be able to just pick up and work from any device at any location at any time. So with all that in mind, what's your big focus going to be in 2022?
I think our big focus is going to be, as Chris say, on making tax digital. Yeah. And part and parcel of that is to enable us to give accountants the right tools to work closer with their customers. Even before COVID, there was a big drive towards more collaboration between an accountant and a customer. It's now just been amplified. So a big investment in the collaboration tools for small businesses with their accountants is what we're going to see, and really to improve Sage for Accountants even more, to address all of those different workflows within a practice to make them as efficient as possible. So efficiency and collaboration is how I'd sum it up.
And then from my approach, similar themes, but actually probably less techy, because MTD is certainly a transformational legislation theme, the biggest one in over 25 years. And therefore, it's got to be one of our missions to actually not only provide awareness and education to the masses, because at the moment, very few small business owners are actually aware that MTD for small businesses is happening in April 24. But more importantly, provide confidence and approaches and best practice in terms of how accountants can get ready, maybe tweak the workflows which they've applied already over the last couple of years. But also, more importantly, think about how technology can actually enable them to perform more, do more work, and also satisfy the needs of their clients. all of which is more around processes, best practice, education, and awareness. And quite nicely in the background, our technology enables the accountant to do that as well.
Well, I've loved chatting with you both today, but we've come full circle now. We began talking about your origin stories, and now I'm going to ask you, what was the soundtrack to those origin stories? If you look back throughout your career, is there a particular song or piece of music that has inspired you along the way, or just helps you get your head in the zone before a big meeting or going on stage to deliver a keynote? And Gertie, I'm going to put you under pressure here and ask you to answer that one first.
My husband will probably love you for asking this question because I spend way too much time thinking about the soundtrack to my life. And it's surprising that I'm not ending up somewhere between Cher and ABBA or Cher doing ABBA. But today I'm going to go with Lose Yourself by Eminem. And I think it's one of those songs it makes you feel in the zone, but I also really like the beginning where it goes, if you only had one shot, one opportunity, you capture it or let it slip. And I think that's such a motto to live by, because we never let any single shot go, and we're going to keep pushing forwards.
Wow, absolutely fantastic choice. And that's put you under a bit of pressure now, Chris. So what would your choice be?
Just a little bit. Come on, Gertie. Well, I have the same sort of challenge because if anyone knows me, I have a pretty wide range, broad appreciation of music. And it could be anything from Kylie Minogue to some heavy rock. But then again, what the whole point of this is thinking about what really gives you that happy vibe and gets you in the mood. And it's a case of going back to, 15 years now. It's a case of when you're trying to sort of get a lot of work done or even just getting ready to go out, it's thinking about what puts you in that really sort of, happy vibe and give you the energy. And I still put it in the back of my mind now, especially when I'm sort of going out on stage, talking to accountants or doing a webinar. It's getting that sort of right frame of mind. And I always think that Mr. Brightside from The Killers always does that for me. It's got a good beat, it resonates well, and I think everyone can dance to it as well.
That's a good one, Chris.
Yeah, I'm fighting the urge not to launch into song there as well. I've got to rein myself in. So I'll add both of those to the Spotify playlist. But before I let you go, for anyone listening wanting to find out more information about anything we've talked about today, I appreciate Sage is a pretty big and vast site. So what would be the best starting point to find out more information on what we talked about, and equally contact your team if they've got any questions?
The easiest way would be to go to sage.com/accountants, and they'll be able to find out all about this exciting product launch, or just get in touch with their local Sage office right across the world. We're active in, I think, more than 20 countries, if I remember the last stats. So chances are we're in a country where you are or where your listeners are, and we're always keen to chat with customers.
Well, I think the shift to digital-first accounting is seen as an imperative by just about every accountant listening wherever they are in the world. And that new Sage research showing that 99% of accountants are using some form of digital accounting is of no surprise. But I always say on this podcast at the end of every episode that technology works best when it brings people together. And another thing that we didn't talk about that I think really stands out about what you're trying to do here is you're freeing them up to provide the human touch as well as offering free apps and training, etc. And I think getting that human element is so crucial too. So
absolutely. And thank you for having us. It's been a pleasure chatting with you.
Yeah, thank you again, Neil.
I think the shift to digital-first accounting is seen as an imperative by nearly every accountant out there, wherever they're listening in the world. And with new Sage research showing that 99% of accountants are using some form of digital accounting, I don't think that is too much of a surprise. But what I loved about today's conversation is how Sage is freeing up accountants to provide that more human touch, as well as offering things like apps and training, etc. But over to you. Did this kickstart any insights or experiences with you? Where do you see this world evolving? Whatever it might be, please email me, techblogwriter@outlook.com. You get me on LinkedIn and Twitter at Neil C. Hughes. And my website is techblogwriter.co.uk. But as we race into 2022, I just want to offer a big thank you to each and every one of you for listening and continuing to follow this podcast, and hopefully I'll get to meet a few of you when the world starts opening back up. But thanks so much for listening, and until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thank you for listening to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast with Neil C. Hughes. Remember, technology works best when it brings people together.